Welcome back to the Raice Brothers podcast. Kavod, we are super, super excited to be here on the Ropshitzer's Yartzeit. It's a beautiful morning here in Ramat Bet Shemesh. And we have our holy Rebbe on, Rabbi Gerzi, Rabbi Yehoshua Gerzi. He's been our Rebbe, Yaakov and myself. He's been our Rebbe for the last number of years. We got to know him. It's actually a great story how we even got to know the Rebbe. We got to spend some good time visiting different tzaddikim. And hopefully we'll get into that. But today we want to open up the life story. What were his drives, his childhood, his connection to many, many of the different tzaddikim, from his family, other tzaddikim as well. And he built up these deep relationships. And I think we want to explore that, explore the idea of mentorship, explore what it means to be a Talmud, what it means to connect with tzaddikim, passing on a Mesorah and being connected to a Mesorah, and how it helps us to face the incredible challenges and obstacles that we deal with in a daily life, and how we can really grow and transcend through this, really becoming the Yidden we need to be. So, Kavod, Rebbe, good morning, welcome.
Thank you very, very much.
L'chaim.
I'm super excited about this because even though over the years I have gotten to know the Rebbe a little bit, and I've heard a lot of stories, but all in bits and pieces, and I'm so interested. And like, I know that you were connected to so many different tzaddikim through your life, and I'm interested in hearing like how those relationships came about, and like really driving down and getting into them. I know, and I'm excited to do this because I know you have a wealth of stories and Mesorah to pass on. So let's get right to it.
From the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, let's take it from the beginning.
Let it rip. First of all, where are you from?
Originally from London. Even though my family roots are obviously not from London, but from London. I grew up in London. I was born in London. I grew up in London till the age, I guess when I came to yeshiva, 17, 18, 19, came to yeshiva, came back to England, got married, and spent some time in England. And then I came back to Eretz Yisrael. I've been in Eretz Yisrael maybe, I don't know, my wife will tell me. If my wife here, she throws something at me and she lets me know that I've made a mistake. I think about 14, 15 years I've been in Eretz Yisrael now. But the journey starts in London, or the journey really starts way before that. And my first, I would say, do you want me to speak about the family first, or the Rabbanim, my first mentors? Which direction would you like to?
I want to hear about you, because I know that even as a child growing up, you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you. You specifically had a unique childhood, whereas maybe we could jump right into it. Is that I think that you struggled with dyslexia, and you struggled with maybe some of like the regular system, and then you kind of broke out of it. So tell me a little bit about your family, your history, kind of what led up to you coming into the world, and then tell us a little bit about your growing up.
Okay. I mean, I think I grew up pretty normally. I think I grew up in Baruch Shem from home, and I had all the regular stimulus of upbringing. There were certain challenges, and first of all, I just want to start off just a deep hakar satov for both of you. It's an honor to be in your presence. I love you both very, very much. And we're speaking about Rabbanim, and I've shared this with you. I learn off you. There's so much wealth to learn from you, and thank you deeply. That's to start off with. So, Chesed Hashem, I have brilliant parents who helped me navigate the terrain of my life experiences as growing up. And I would say, I was a pretty normal kid. I don't think there's anything so unique. I liked martial arts, and I liked music, and I liked doing everything that I like to be doing. There was a side of me, my father says to me, and my grandmother used to say to me, I was born old. My grandmother used to throw out this line, you're born an old man. What does that mean? I love history. I've always loved history. I'm enamored and fascinated by this reality that we're plonked here, born into this world, yet for thousands of years beforehand, there's been this unfolding history. And, you know, we have Zaydas in the 1600s. We have Zaydas and Babis in the 1200s, all the way through, unbroken chain. And I always found that really fascinating. I would look at a pigeon. I'd look at a pigeon, go, whoa, that pigeon had like a mommy, a daddy, grandparents, great-grandparents. That pigeon has a lineage all the way back to now. It didn't just pop out of nowhere. And I don't know what it was, but I always found that fascinating. And I remember very early memories of that. I remember very early memories sitting at the park, and I'm like, I don't know, playing. I'm doing something, probably causing havoc. I'm probably causing trouble somewhere. And I just stop and I'd look at a dog, or I'd look at a person, or I'd look at myself. And there's this reality that's so much bigger than us. And here we are in our small state of consciousness when there's a whole universe in front of us. And that always fascinated me. I remember that fascinated me. I remember as well, I wanted always to know everything. I love knowledge, but I love as well applied knowledge. I want to know things. I want to know how things work. I want to know the mechanisms behind things. So I remember growing up, I found this very interesting. It's true to say, as you mentioned, I had certain challenges, and I still struggle with them today. And one of them is dyslexia. I mean, that's really the main one, which maybe even my dyslexia is an illusion today. I don't know. But that definitely did not help being in a mainstream school where we are expected, as both of us know, as a whole world of us know, that, you know, we have these books in front of us, and we're meant to know all these books in front of us and read them, and we're meant to be able to open something up, a Gemara, Shitosvos, Rishonim, Achronim. So that didn't go so well. Let's just say that didn't go so well. However, I'm thankful for it, because that definitely opened up a side of me that may not have been opened. That opened up life experiences, that took me on a journey which, who knows if I was just a mainstream without these challenges, who knows? I don't know. So the combination that's coming out right now in the moment as I speak to you, this combination of a thirst for knowledge, this fascination with the bigness, hakoil, the bigness, the prat and the klal. And I would say my challenge as well definitely gave room and gave a focal point in my life. As I said, could be, if you ask me tomorrow, I may say something different. I don't know. But right now, that's what I have to share with my upbringing. And to go into, speaking about mentorship. So my parents, Baruch Hashem, are fantastic. And my father's always had his Rabbanim. And he's had various Rabbanim, but when I came into the world, my father had a relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and as well with the Biala Rebbe. And I was very young when my father had his relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and that's as well a world within itself, the world of Chabad. However, the Biala Rebbe, I would suggest, the Biala Rebbe was the first Rebbe. I remember going to him age 5. Biala Rebbe, Rav Ben Sion Rabinovich, the Mavasa Tov. And I was just as well enamored seeing this man who I was 5. I didn't understand the whole bigger picture. What I do remember is the first time I went to the Rebbe, there was this non-from man sitting on one side and non-from woman sitting on the other side. And for a 5-year-old kid, okay, they look similar. I guess I recognize the difference between from and not from the superficial perspective. And I thought they were together. And I found out that they weren't. My father started to speak to them. There's 2 people going into the Rebbe. And I said, wow, okay, I guess I chapped at that age. Oh, here you have this Rebbe who was really kind. And he spoke to me. He didn't speak down to me. He really asked me questions. And I remember, I must have been closer to 6, but I remember it very clearly. And I remember these 2 people who, it's like, I said to my father, I said, why are they going to the Rebbe if they're not from? I remember asking my father. My father gave me a good answer. He gave me, he gave me a good answer for what I needed. But I remember that was my first kesher, so to speak. And then I would say deeper relationships, as I matured, was in London, there was a Rav called Reb Halpern, who was the Radimishler Rebbe. He was also a relative. And he was very interesting. He was very, very interesting. He was from Europe. And I met him. I really started to get closer to him from my bar mitzvah. And there's many stories about him. And as well, another individual in London, Rabbi Simcha Rubin, who's a relative, my mother's relative, the Sasva Rebbe. So I would say growing up, before my teenage years, my father did take me to several different tzaddikim, but tzaddikim who I can say that I had a relationship, tzaddikim who I can say knew me. You had the Biala Rebbe, the Sasva Rebbe, and Reb Chuna Halpern in London.
The Rav Reuben, the Sasva Rebbe, he's related also to the Ropshitzer lineage?
Yes. The Ropshitzer's son-in-law, his name was Reb Ushi Shai Reuben. So his lineage comes from Reb Ushi Shai.
Wow.
And as well, Reb Chuna Halpern, the Halpern, there was a grandson-in-law, the Bruzhana, the Fascination of Bruzhan. So Reb Chuna Halpern was a descendant of Reb Ushi Shai, a descendant of the Ropshitzer as well.
Wow. So how did you connect with them? Did your father introduce you to them?
I don't remember. Like, the honest truth is, the Biala Rebbe my father introduced me to. I guess the way it happened with Reb Chuna is Reb Chuna has a shul, Reb Chuna's. He has a base of medrash. And I used to daven there. We used to go there. My father had a chavrusa on a Sunday morning in Sfas Emes with an old yid, with an alti yid in London. And we used to daven shacharis. I remember because they were formative rummaging days. There was a shemus outside. So I wasn't always into davening. So I used to rummage outside through the shemus, and I found lots of old things. I found my first old book, a chumash from 1670, which is on the shelf somewhere here. And I remember I would always see Reb Chuna, and I think once he stopped and spoke to me, and this was before my bar mitzvah. Already when I was bar mitzvah, Reb Chuna, he gave me a sefer. Reb Chuna gave me a sefer, and I remember this is when I started my diary. I have a diary, Hisaras Tshuva, I think it's called. I still have it. I can't remember what it's called. Good stuff. So what happens is, it was before my bar mitzvah, and Reb Chuna gave me a Sfas Emes of Bruzhan, not Ger, Bruzhan. I have it on my shelf behind me. And he wrote something inside of it. And I said to him, look, I can't read it. Can you read something to me? And I remember he sat and read me a Torah. About Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and how Yosef was always matzliach because he had Hashem on his mind. I remember that was the Torah that we read, and there was a couple of gematrias there. And I think it was from my bar mitzvah, really the relationship started. That's when I could remember that he gave me the sefer as a matana for my bar mitzvah. Then I started to speak to him. And I think it was Reb Chuna, because in our family, from my mother's side, we as well are descendants of different tzaddikim, various tzaddikim. And I think it was Reb Chuna who started to open that up. And it could also be that Reb Chuna introduced me to Rabbi Reuben. I do remember, though, that I think it's a little bit blurry, but when I was 12 or 13, we did a family tree project in school. And I think we spoke to Rabbi Reuben as well about certain stories. But definitely after my bar mitzvah, Reb Chuna said to speak as well to Rabbi Reuben. And that's how I started to build my kesher, as I can consciously remember. So it was really from my bar mitzvah.
I don't know so many 12 or 13-year-old kids that start building relationships with Rabbanim. I mean, I know, like we grew up on, there was a Rav Varshal, and I guess maybe because he didn't speak English so well, but I really didn't have much to do with him. Like, I observed him, I saw him, we said good Shabbos, So how did a 12 or 13-year-old kid become so, start building a relationship, become interested? I mean, most kids I know nowadays are more interested in, sports or their cell phone, or what kind of kid were you that you started these relationships? And we talk about relationship, how often were you around them? And I'm just curious to open that up.
So first of all, I was doing everything that I think other teenagers were doing. I was causing havoc, doing my martial arts, playing my music, listening to my music. I think maybe I can suggest like this, that it could be, I think for most people, that there's a person or a few people who they remember fondly. Why? Because they took interest in them and they were caring. And I would suggest here we have two much older individuals, but they cared. They really cared. They asked after my well-being. They took time to read to me. They took time to tell me stories. They got me to do things as well. So for example, when I built a relationship with Rabbi Reuben, we were pottering around in the Beis HaMedrash, cleaning the Beis HaMedrash. I think it was on a Tisha B'Av, we cleaned the mikveh. They cared. If I think the core root of what drew me to them is that they cared. And I happened to be, they had these weird and wonderful stories as well, which I was fascinated by. There was this maturity that I really appreciated that I definitely didn't have. But I would say they cared. I felt somebody who really looked out for me. Mm. And that drew me back. That's an unbelievable fuel when somebody looks at you and somebody cares for you and somebody believes in you, somebody supports you, encourages you. Somebody doesn't tell you, you're doing wrong, but somebody tells you you're doing right. That's good. So that was very nutritious for me. That was very energetic. And for the second part of your question, I mean, I was there a good few times a week. I mean, Reb Chuna, after I was bar mitzvah, when I was going to school, we were davening in school, but there was a center, there was a learning center. This is a couple of years later. So I had this relationship which started, on a Sunday morning with Reb Chuna. And then various times during the week, I myself would go down to Rabbi Reuben. I trained martial arts. There was a church in Golders Green called Hodford Road, and they had there a hall, and I would train in the hall there with a few of my chaverim, martial arts. On the way back, we would go back to, Mechila Slicha and Kapara. I better be careful what I say here.
No. We're very open.
I was going to say, don't crucify me, but I won't say that in public. Sorry. But I guess the Ropshitzer started up in the morning already. I think 3 o'clock in the morning, the Ropshitzer started. So what would happen is we would go train martial arts with certain chaverim, and then a few of us would go to Rabbi Reuben and would go to his house, and and then I would go to the Beis HaMedrash and clean in the Beis HaMedrash a bit. So I remember that's how I used to go, and that happened a couple of times a week. And then as I matured, I remember 14, 15, 16, I was davening by Reb Chuna almost every morning. And I was speaking to the Sasser Rebbe a number of times a week. So the relationship definitely matured. It took a leap, and it definitely matured.
Were you going to school at the time? Sorry. Were you consistently in school?
Yes.
But
I was consistently in school. I managed to turn up to most of the classes. I had very good teachers, Chassid Shem.
But you were very involved, like with being in these other places, being in the shuls, being in the.
Yes. Yeah. I enjoyed that. I'd go to the mikveh, and then Reb Chuna would come to the mikveh, so I'd go out the mikveh and I'd prepare a coffee for Reb Chuna. A number of times Reb Chuna would come into the mikveh, my teeth. He sometimes would forget to put his hand.
How old was he around this time?
I see you.
He died. Reb Chuna died in his 90s. He was 93. And I guess he was in his 60s, 70s, no, 70s. He must have been in his 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that in his 70s. But he was in his 70s, and if you spoke his language, which I naturally did, I enjoyed Mesorah, I enjoyed stories, I enjoyed songs. He answered me. I remember, and plus I got to shul very early. I always like getting up early. I like the early hours of the day. So he'd give a daf yomi at 5, I think it was 5 in the morning. I would be in shul 4:45. I'd be there 4:45 in the morning. I'd get mikveh. I'd get his coffee ready, his drink. I would sometimes prepare him a drink. And I would ask him a question, Rebbe, I just read about mojits. Please, can you share with me a mojit nigun? And he would take my hands, and sometimes he would dance with me. I was like, wow, gewaldig. He would sing in mojit nigun, or would speak about Ropshitzer, or would speak about certain sfarim. And he answered me. Rabbi Simcha Rubin as well would tell me stories. And I don't think they were so interested in the martial arts and the guitar. I like my music, drums, and I was into my music and my Metallica, Guns N' Roses, and things like that. I don't think they were so interested in that. However, the other side of my life, they were interested.
That's fantastic. It's so interesting. I want to go back to something you said earlier about how we're not just here now, but we're part of a big flow of history. And I feel like that's something that's one of the things that always drew me to you. And as I always saw you as somebody who, like, any of our conversations were much bigger in scope. Like, I absolutely love history, and I love being aware of where we are, not just right now in this lifetime, but where we are as a Jewish people in history, and where we are in the world at large. So my question is, I guess the way you're describing is by connecting to as you naturally had an inclination for that, and also by connecting to these people who had a Mesorah, who gave you a sense of history and stories and background, and kind of led you into even more into this place of recognizing as a Jew that we're not just here now, that we're part of a chain. So who did they connect you to? When did they tell you about their mentors?
So Reb Chuna was an anicle from a number of tzaddikim, and Reb Chuna himself loved history. He loved Jewish history. I happen to love secular history as well. I love Jewish history, but I love global history. I love world history, universal history. And again, I'm enamored by it. I'm taken by it. And with, for example, Reb Chuna, he came from unbelievable yichus. He's a Ropshitzer anicle. Reb Shmuel Engel was his grandfather. He's a Divrei Chaim anicle. He was connected to a number of tzaddikim, and he was born in Europe. He wasn't born in Eretz Yisrael. He was born in Kashau. So he himself was incredibly connected to Mesorah and history from a young age. He never missed, during the war days, he never missed mikveh, for example. He was very makpid on hanhagas and minhagim, very makpid on kedusha, very makpid on growth. And it was unbelievable to speak to him, because a lot of people I spoke to, he met. He was in touch, I think, age 14. He wrote a letter to the Rogatchover, and the Heilige Rogatchover wrote back, I think it starts off Hagoin Hagodol. And he's 14 years old. The Rogatchover, wow, who everybody knows. The Rogatchover would call people whatever they would call, he would call them. And he met a lot of these people that I was reading about at this age, in my books, in my Sfarim, the storybooks. And plus, because he's from Europe, he's coming from a different world. It's a very different world, Europe, pre-Europe and post-Europe, a very different world. I hear very often, it's the old world and we should let go of it. you know what? If we lived with some of their values now, people would be far happier. People would be far healthier. And we can't forget. We want to be drawing some of that kedusha and some of that basic lifestyle into our life, the important things in life. And for Reb Chuna, I saw that. For the Sasvar Rebbe, I saw that. They were pre-war, so they had their Rabbanim, Reb Shmuel Engel, and their Rebbes, and the Shatzer Rebbe in London, who was a giant. And he himself was a giant. So there was this very, very deep, rich connection to the pre-war world of Europe. And Reb Chuna definitely had that. And he wrote, he's got a sefer of 3 volumes of all the tzaddikim he was in touch with. And it's unbelievable to read, because you're reading about what we call mystical legends today. And there he was, serving them, speaking to them, learning from them. Rabbi Simcha Rubin as well had a very rich Mesorah. He was a Belzer Einikel, and a Ropshitzer Einikel, and many others. And I would say that the Sasvar Rebbe was quieter about the history, but when I spoke to him, he did speak about it. But the thing is, he was history. He was it. He was Chesed. I remember going into, there's lots of weird stories with him. So I remember once I took my...
We love weird stories.
I took my driving test. It's not such a weird story. I shouldn't say that. It's a good story, but I love the weird ones as well. So I took my driving test, and I had my driving test. It was like 3:00 in the afternoon. So I spoke to the Sasvar Rebbe, and the Sasvar Rebbe said to me, pick me up at 4. And I said, Rebbe, I didn't pass my driving test yet. And I have to ask my Abba if I can use the car. So, he says, pick me up at 4. So I passed my driving test. What's the first thing I'm doing when I passed my driving test? I went to Sasvar Rebbe, I picked him up, and we dropped off envelopes of money in people's, running and dropping off envelopes of people's money. And I think this happened that week at like 3:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning. He told me to come pick him up, and we're dropping off envelopes, and he's an older man, and he runs, and obviously he couldn't get the envelope in the post box in the hole, which is in the house. And he's like, bye, bending over to get it in. And then the person in the house hears some movement downstairs. So the light goes on, looks out, goes, hello. And then he runs back to the car and he goes, you're doing the next one. So,
that's fantastic.
I have a lot of interesting mices like that going all the way through. Yeah, Baruch Hashem.
So I know that your family, you come from a very eclectic mix of different backgrounds and yichus. And I know that did your father, I'm sure, gave that over to you as a child, and was it your father first who instilled in you that sense of history and where you come from?
I think, first of all, it was my father's father. I'm very similar to my father's father. My grandfather, I'm very similar to him. He was a genius. And I would say the genius is less important to the fact that he was so deeply caring and loving for all of humanity. He had this enveloping love that nothing was left out. And he just loved reality. And he knew, in my opinion, he knew everything. He had a photographic memory. He used to buy encyclopedias and just go through them and eat them up. History he was amazing. Politics, history, sciences, arts. He was an artist and he was an engineer. He was a cobbler. He unbelievable human being. And I remember growing up, used to tell me stories about his father and his grandfather who was a tzaddik. His father was a tzaddik, about my grandmother's father, his father-in-law who's a tzaddik. And I grew up with this unbelievable emphasis on recognizing your roots. If you want to know who you are, there's only so far you can go without knowing where you've come from. And if you know where you want to go, recognize where you've come from, because history repeats itself. And my grandfather really started me on this journey when I was from a very young age, telling me stories about his father, his grandfather, about his father-in-law, and the different Mesorahs from that side of the family.
Where did he grow up?
So my grandfather was born in Edirne, which is near Turkey, and it's near the Balkan. And when he was about 12 or 13, 14, I'm not sure specifically of the ages, they changed in the stories when he told them over. Him and his brother and his two sisters left Edirne to come to Eretz Yisrael. And basically they left their parents and they walked. They walked from their place of origin, Edirne, to Eretz Yisrael. And the richness of that lineage, my grandfather, the Gerzi side, goes back. The first story we have in our family from the Gerzi side goes back to Shabtai, Mr. Shabtai Svi, the troublemaker, where my ancestor who lived in Izmir, there were Ashkenazim living in Turkey. There was a polyglot of nations in Turkey. There was Ashkenazim and Sfardim. They were Ashkenazim, and Reb Shabtai was trying to get my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Reb Shlomo Gerzi, to be on his side. And basically, he ran away and he ran to Edirne. That's how they got to Edirne. So they were in Edirne for a number of generations. And they were the chief rabbis of Edirne, and they were people of the community. They gave in every respect. That's the first story that we have. We have a couple of other stories from that time period as well. But all the way through, there's jumps. But basically, there's an unbroken chain of Rabbanim, unbroken chain of businessmen. It's a beautiful thing. Again, this is something that, as you know, I'm very passionate about. And that is the baseline of living a balanced life, having this rhythm and balance of life, which includes not just Torah learning. It includes as well, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us, okay, I'm not going into Torahs now, but the Nakuda is that there was this richness of balance. They were Rabbanim. I think I'm 48th generation of being a rabbi. I didn't plan to be a rabbi. Didn't necessarily want to be a rabbi, but I'm 48th generation of having smicha. My grandfather was the only one that didn't have smicha. But from there's 48 generations. That's a long time. I'm proud of that. And
what year does that go back to?
It goes back a long time.
That's a very long time.
It goes back over 500 years, spanning over 500 years. Wow. They as well were businessmen. So they weren't just in the Ruchnius, they were in the Gashmis as well. They were businessmen. They were poskim. They were makublim. There's a story. I'll give you one example. My great-great-great-grandfather, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Gerzi. Rabbi Yitzchak Gerzi, his father was Reb Shlomo Gerzi, who my grandfather met. He was one of 12 brothers and one sister. 12 brothers and one sister. And in Edirne, they had a cheese and wine factory. They sold cheese and wine. And because they were such a Chosheva family in the area where they came from, people would buy cheese and wine from them, and they were very wealthy. And what they would do is they would break off. One person would sit and learn the whole year, and everybody else would support that person. And they would rotate every 12 years. Every single one of them had a full half-day learning. So they were learning a full half-day, and everybody would chip in. There was such a strong achdus. There was such a strong family achdus. And this was so important to them, that there was love and harmony with the extended family. So they were wealthy. They were wealthy. No one was left out financially. And they were osek deeply in learning. Nigla, Nista, Paiskim. So I'm very proud of that. I try my best to express that in my life, in my daladam. And as well with my brothers, we try to live like that to the best of our ability.
Wow, it's interesting. In growing up, I'm the youngest of my family, but I never met any of my grandparents. I'm named after the fourth of the grandparents to pass away, and I remember at a very young age, I must have 6th, 7th grade, writing like an English paper in school. And I wrote about like self-confidence, and I remember writing about how like self-confidence comes and self-esteem comes from knowing where you are. I remember reading about how in Europe it was like, if you were a shoemaker, you're a shoemaker for a few generations. You knew who you were because you knew where you came from and what you were connected to. And I felt that I maybe lacked that, that Mesorah, even though we have a beautiful Mesorah, and I definitely have learned about it more over the years. But I felt that, I didn't know about it. And obviously I cherish it now. I talk to, a lot of family members getting the stories about our Zaidas and Babas and things like that. How, it's interesting. I also transplanted. And so now here we are living in Ramat Bet Shemesh. And many times when we're in these new communities, as immigrants, you don't really necessarily have the community where you have the old people, the middle people, the young people, and there's this integration of where the young ones grow up seeing the past generations and seeing that ishtalshalos. How do you give that to your kids and your family in a way that they can also kind of live with this appreciation for the multi-generational aspect and fitting into history?
Amazing question. When you've both figured that out, let me know.
I mean, you must do something. I'm saying.
I find it's difficult. It's not poshut. I don't believe it's poshut. The upbringing that I had, my kids haven't had. They don't see, they knew their great-grandparents. My Baruch Hashem, they knew my great-grandparents. They knew their great-grandparents, apart from the youngest ones. So my eldest kids have that. They saw their great-grandparents. They saw their great-grandmother and great-grandfather. I was Zaidy. I saw some of my great-grandparents. My parents come, my in-laws come. I think that grandparents, if possible, to spend time, I believe that's very, very important. And if you don't have the grandparents, you have to find some. I believe, again, this is just Yehoshua Gerzi speaking, could be as nonsense, but I believe it's important to see old people and to meet with old people and to spend time with old people. I believe that. And I myself, I would go to old age homes. I grew up, I would go to old age homes in an Eretz Yisrael. I would go to old age homes out here. It's an unbelievable thing. Now it's a slightly different world. In the last 15 years, a lot has changed in regards to a previous generation and a generation today. 15 years ago, you had people who were from the previous generation in their 90s who were still very lucid. So I remember, I would hear stories of a Talmud of this tzaddik or a Talmud of this tzaddik, and they were stuck in an old age home somewhere, and you'd go speak to them. Oh, it was Mechai Mason for them. There was an old man who was a Talmud of the Jikafa, Rabbi Yehoshua Gerzi, who was in Bet Shemesh. And I spoke to one of the Jikafa Einikel in America. It could even be, it was a Jikafa Rebbe here in Eretz Yisrael. And he said, there's an old Yid who is in Bet Shemesh in the old age home. And I ran to meet him, and he told me wild stories. So I believe very deeply, if we don't have our grandparents in our lives, find old people. Spend time with old people. It may sound strange to us, but there's a richness. There's a richness, even if they're not a tzaddik. They don't have to be a tzaddik. One of my Rabbanim told me, you don't have to find the biggest Rebbe in the world as a Rebbe. You don't need that. Find somebody who's a mensch. Find somebody who's got Mesorah, Talmid Chacham. They don't have to be the biggest Rebbe in the world. And I speak to so many people today, and I believe they're missing that, and it's causing them harm. People speak about Gedolei Torah, but just find an old person in Meir, find an old person in Yerushalayim, in Bet Shemesh. There are old people around, older than you, in their 60s or 70s. There's still Talmidim today of Rav Moshe Feinstein, of Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, of the different Rebbes, the Ger Rebbe and the Ropshitzer Rebbes. There's still tzaddikim who are not necessarily tzaddikim of such high and known caliber, but they were around tzaddikim, and those tzaddikim who they were around tzaddikim. And I think there's a richness for that. Adopt a lifestyle where that's included and not left out in our life. So we can see, I tell you a story. I'll share with you a story.
Yeah.
So in America, there was a friend of mine. I haven't been in touch with him actually for a very long time. I met him many years ago, the first time I went to America. And he they're Ger Hasidim. And his family, who's now Nifta, was a Holocaust survivor. And I met his father, and his father's, Ger, Gibor, like stubborn, strong, and very, very matter of fact, very real in where they are and what their opinions are. Businessman. And he must have been, when I met him, in his 80s. And I was giving a Zoom class to America from Israel. And there was a group we're talking in the Rabbi Yisraelis of guidance. And they said, listen, in the secular world, we have guidance. We have our professors, we have our teachers. None of us have grandparents. All it happened to be, I was speaking to 5 people from this group. And those 5 people, none of them had grandparents. They all died in the Holocaust. They have their parents, and they didn't have grandparents. So I thought to myself, okay, let's do something. They as well were not from. They weren't from. So what happens is that I sent them to this Zayda, this Ger Chosid Zayda. And they took their lunch, and I called everyone up, it was Masada, and they went to his store. He had a store. I think they sold electrics or lights, and he went to his store. And I'm not going to go into all the stories, but he would tell over stories about, people breaking into his store and what he did. One time somebody broke into my store and I punched him one. And he would just tell over these funny stories, not even about Yiddishkeit. There were these funny stories about just occurrences that happened to him. And he had an old-fashioned relationship with his wife, and his wife would come in, what do you want from me now? Leave me alone. You have to take your medicine. I don't want to take my medicine. No, take your medicine. Let me die. You drive me mad. And there was this old-time relationship. And when I heard about it, when I heard about them going and the occurrences and the stories, I got a little bit panicked. I said, oy vey, I hope I did the right thing. Because, you see somebody, and my first thought was, maybe they're going to be put off because of the relationship between him and his wife. Even though they love each other, they just have this old-time relationship, matter of fact, and he's making fun of her and she's making fun of him. I'm like, and maybe the stories weren't of a proper nature, and they got offended. And it was I got an amazing response, because out of those people, usually people go to Kiruv events, and 4 of those 5 became frum because of him. And they became frum just because of his authenticity. They became frum just because he was him, and they saw this simplicity of life. After he's telling his wife, be quiet, leave me alone, let me die, this morbid, this darkness, this humor, he would say, Shalom Bayis is the most important thing in the world. And but 4 of those 5 became frum. And I don't know if they would have been frum if they went the normal route of seeing, the Kiruv rabbi perfectly in tune with his wife, and all the beautiful kinderlich around the table singing their songs and helping at the dishes, So I think there's a reality check of connecting to the previous generation. There's that wealth of information. There's that simplicity, and there's that depth, and they know what's important. They know what's important, and they're giborim. You're talking about, we're lacking this today. Everybody inside has a hero and a warrior. Everybody has inside of them a hero and a warrior. And for most people, that hero and that warrior is dormant. In the previous generation, that hero and that warrior was accented.
It was forced to come out because of the situations that they lived in.
100%, yes. Nevertheless, it came out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like it's been coming out a little bit recently, with the whole coronavirus thing, where you see suddenly simple people that are dealing with things that are there for others, healthcare people and people of service are suddenly so appreciated in a world where everything was just about comfort, and and suddenly like something real hit the world that brought a certain heaviness, but it also it had a weight. Kavod is from kaved. Like there's a certain weight that comes, and suddenly people have a new way of evaluating things. And I'm enjoying so much hearing some of the things that you're saying, and it's hitting me, and I'm resonating so deeply with it.
With what's going on right now, I'm moved to tears daily. I sit there just crying because of the chesed that's going on. It's, even though it's uncomfortable and painful, and I'm speaking to friends in America and trying to comfort them, you know, a person who's in quarantine and can't sit shiva because they've just lost their father. They're sitting shiva by themselves to speak to them and comfort them. The chesed is absolutely profound. And kol kavod to humanity. Kol kavod right now to humanity. It's like, Rabbanim Shalom, you see everything that's going on. Note that down. You note that down, Rabbanim Shalom. It's unbelievable what's going on. Unbelievable. Shkayach.
Wow.
You know, back to what we were talking about before about how to give over to our children, the feeling of the previous generation. I know for me, for us, you know, like Yehuda said before, moving away from the States, so we're not really around our parents all the time. And thank God our parents do have, over the past number of years, been coming here for most of the time for Pesach and Sukkot. So at those, you know, it's critical Yom Tovim time, which is like such a big time to give over. They've been around. But one thing that we've done is just stories. And I feel like that's such an awesome way to teach kids. Like, I know something that I've done for years. My kids are getting a little older, so I don't read to them as much, but I still do. But for years, from when they were little, I would read to them every night. I would read to them mostly Jewish stories, real ones, you know, stories of Rebbe, stories of tzaddikim, but also just stories of heroes. I mentioned in a different podcast, some of my favorite books were about people from previous generation, like All for the Boss, Rabbi Yosef Herman, who was a real person in a real family, and it was written by his daughter growing up in America, and being real heroes. Rabbi Aryeh Levine, you know, the book about Rabbi Aryeh Levine, Tzaddik in Our Time, and then we'd go out and meet, and there's people in our neighborhood who are, you know, grandchildren or great grandchildren, and we'd meet these people, and those stories also. Maybe it's not the same, and it's nowhere near the same as actually meeting people and hearing the stories from them, but it also does something really important. And maybe that's a way that people who don't necessarily have the ability to go and connect to older people, and it's not always so simple, but maybe that's a great way to give over to our kids a sense of history, a sense of where we're from, a sense of the heroicness of the Jewish people of the previous generations.
I think you're spot on. Rabbi Yaakov, that stories, I believe stories are very, very, very important. And I try my best, especially stories. I think I've mentioned to you before, there was a number of stories that my father would tell over that I realized in later years were about him. And the Pilzno Rav, Rabbi Singer, used to tell over stories about the Raice Chassid, the red-haired Chassid. And one of his daughters, and always, you know what happened to the Raice Chassid? You know what happened to the red-haired Chassid, the ginger Chassid? And years later, through recognizing the stories that were told over and certain events that took place, Zaidy, the Pilzno Rav, Rabbi Singer, was telling over stories about himself. And I remember one of the tzaddikim, he said, sometimes it's worth doing a mitzvah just to tell over the story to your kids. It's worth doing a mitzvah. It's worth doing a maisa. It's worth doing maisim tovim so you can tell over the story to your kids. You know what I did today? I did this and this and this. And I remember my father would always tell us stories. And my grandfather, he was a story. And I think this is something so important that you're sharing. I'm going to reaffirm that within me. Thank you very, very much. Stories are very important. Whenever you can tell a story, tell it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very excited that you just mentioned Zaidy of Singer, because that is someone that I've been waiting to get into that this whole time. We've talked about you growing up, and Zaidy, I've heard from you. Rav Singer lived in New York in the Lower East Side, correct?
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you connected to him and how you ended up calling him Zaidy?
Okay. maybe we can go back a little bit first. When speaking about Reb Chuna and Reb Simcha Rubin, Rabbi Rubin, the word tzaddik doesn't necessarily come up for me. They were people who were in my life. I look at them now as tzaddikim. They were people in my life that I grew up with. They were my Rabbanim. They were rabbis, my mentors. I think I was about 14 years old, and my father went to get a bracha from a very, very young individual. Today he's white, but when I met him, he had a black beard. He had like a gingery brown black beard. And I walked into his room and he smashed me to pieces spiritually. I'm like, what the heck just happened here? Sort of experience. And I don't know where I was catapulted. So I was this 14-year-old. I walk into this room and there's this, obviously it's not a real light, but I felt this light. When you speak about light, I just felt something, this cheeky little grin, this smile, and my kishkas were blown to six. I would say that's probably one of the first experiences of meeting a tzaddik. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern. And I remember that was, it was in London, Pesach time. Rabbi Yitzchak Meir goes to London, Rav Morgenstern goes to London. He would spend many years going to London to his mother for Pesach. And that had an effect on me.
How old was he then?
Must have been in his 40s.
Wow.
He's now, how old's Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern now? In his 50s, 60, maybe mid-50s?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Maybe he's older than that, though.
Maybe it's mid-50s, maybe. So must have been in his 30s, 40s. I was
wow,
20 years difference, I guess. And that was like mikveh. That was like mikveh and Yom Kippur all in one go. I felt it. And I never felt something like that before. I never had that sort of experience. And Baruch Shem, I was zeicher to speak to him. It was the first time I got to speak to him. And there was other individuals who I met as well. Reb Moshe Shapiro would come to London in the summer. So he's another individual I met. And I felt awe. I was like, whoa. Like there was awe. Rabbi Yitzchak Meir was something different. It wasn't that awe. It was like, the best way I could explain it is like, what the heck just happened here? That's like what I tell my kids. What was that? And that was something that I experienced, and it did something to me. It awoke something in me, which again, that's a avodah of the tzaddikim. You have tzaddikim that don't have to say anything, even though Reb Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern doesn't stop. He goes and goes and goes. There's as well this silence behind everything that's going on in his life. There's this silence. There's this childlike smile on his face, and he's just alive. And
I just have one story about him that also, just to maybe flesh it out a little. Maybe like 15 years ago, I was in Ezra's Torah in his neighborhood for Shavuos. And so Shavuos night, I was going around to different shows looking for something interesting. And I ended up in his base medrash, and it was, 2, 3 in the morning. And there was a couple of Farshluffene guys like learning, and it was very quiet. And then I looked in the Ezra's Nashim, it was like windows, and there was Rav Meir, all dressed in white. His face is shining, and he's sweating, and he's learning. And then all of a sudden, he just jumped up. He runs into the other room and he just grabs everybody up. We all start dancing, wild dancing for a good few minutes, dancing and running around the room. Not like Fashlufner, running around the room, singing energy, and his face was gleaming and shining. And he stopped and he went back to learn. And then maybe another 10, 15 minutes later, again, he jumped up and got everyone up and started running around the room again. And it was an awesome experience. I didn't know, also was like, what is going on here? I don't understand, but this is amazing.
I thank Rabbeinu Shel Olam that he planted a Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern in our generation. Shkayach Hashem, Shkayach Beir Olam. Baruch Hashem. So let's go forward now. So what happens is that I always had this experience in the recesses of my consciousness. And when I was in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, there was a beautiful tzaddik called Reb Shmuel Braun, who is the grandson of Rabbi Singer. And we sometimes played music together and we spent time together, and he would tell me about his grandfather. He says, you have to speak to my Zaidy. You have to speak to my Zaidy. And he would tell me about his Zaidy, how he would put his shoes on. And there was something just in the way of how he was speaking about his grandfather that already woke something up. It did something. And I remember it was Pesach time before I got married. I think it was Pesach time, just before I got married. I had my first conversation with Rabbi Singer. Picked up the phone and I called him, and I had a couple of questions, and I didn't even ask my questions. I prepared the questions in order to have something to speak about. And I heard this voice, and this voice awoke something in me. And it was the same sort of feeling that I felt with Harav Morgenstern. It was that same sort of like, whoa, okay. And I really started to develop my relationship with him just after I got married. And I would first speak to him very often. I would call him on the telephone, ask him shilas. And I heard this childlike voice. And he'd already had 2 strokes. So it was difficult to hear him speak. And he had other medical issues. So it wasn't so clear. And I prepared myself. However, Baruch Shem, I managed. And I had questions, and he answered them not just adequately. He answered them with tact, with sensitivity, with depth, always wanting to know the context. He never just gave me, but always wanted to know what's a little bit of the context that's going on here, so we could really give the correct answer for the shaila. And this care was unbelievable. And then there was a chasna of a friend of mine, and I looked at this as an opportunity. Let's go to America. And that's when I went to America, and Chesed Hashem, by the grace of God, I managed to spend time with Rabbi Singer. I first met him at one of his grandchildren's opsharing, who now is we know him, one of the glass boys. And he just shone. I went into the table, I sat there, my wife was with me. And both of us just looked at each other and we started to cry. I can't explain why. We just started to cry. We felt as if it was Yom Kippur. And as I got to speak to him more in his beautiful, simple way, today we lack, on a certain respect, what can we call it? We spoke about it once, Rabbi Yaakov, how not tact. There's another word, subtlety. And this subtlety, he just was like a master at subtlety. He just knew. And for me, I felt as if I was standing in front of, Moshe Rabbeinu. I felt as if I was standing in front of Moshiach. I can imagine the love that he had. And again, this was something that was unbelievable. A couple of the first stories he told me about the Baal Shem Tov, I recognized was his whole life. And plus, only when I started to speak to him, I realized how many frustrations I had within me. And he did an amazing thing. He answered a question. And as we were speaking and he was answering a question, it's as if he was zapping a frustration. So we were talking, something deep would come up inside of me about what we were speaking about. And as he would answer, the answer was like a melting away of that frustration. An amazing thing. And he opened up a world for me, and he introduced me to different tzaddikim, which today I'm trying to share with people, trying to share it with myself. I'm a little bit thick, and it takes me 20 odd years. Other people seem to be getting it a lot quicker. And the point is that I'm sharing it with myself, I'm sharing it with others. And he gave a derech, and that was definitely part of the journey as well, that when I met, I'd been through hundreds of Sifrei Chassidus, all the classic Chassidic texts I went through, Tanya and Lakutei Maharan and all the Sfarim al-Hatayra, hundreds of them. I started to learn Sifrei Kabbalah, the Arizal, and I was learning halacha. I did Smicha and Niddah and Yerodea. I was in Kollel at this point in my life. and I was working as well, and I was studying, and I recognized that I had this underlying frustration. And that is the experience. All the Sfarim are speaking about Aveda and states and ways, derachim, derech. And I felt, even though I'd been around these people and they helped tremendously in many areas in my life, and I saw by them a derech. When I'm reading the Sfarim to my life experience, there was a disconnect. There are words on pages. And are we just a brain on a stem? Or is there meant to be a derech? Is there meant to be a way to take the words on a page and then have a science, a methodology to live it? And apart from his warmth and kindness and wisdom that's definitely connected, as I said, to the first couple of stories he told over about the Baal Shem Tov, he started to give a mahalach. And the mahalach took the words from the pages of the old creased books that I'd been learning, and he gave them life. He animated them with a scientific mythology and methodology in Avodas Hashem, which is not just specific for this sort of Jew or that sort of Jew. It was universal. He showed the architecture of the soul, how the human being works. And he brought to life Shas, he brought to life Torah. And as I went further, he introduced me to different tzaddikim in America. They just added and added and added to this. They made clearer what Rabbi Singer originally shared with me. So it was a very powerful experience, and it was until he was nifta, a long-term relationship.
So you only met him after you got married?
That's correct. I spoke to him on the phone before I got married, and I had about a year phone relationship, and then I was able to meet Rabbi Singer in person.
How much time did you end up spending with him in person? How long were you in America for?
I went a few times. So all in all, I think I met him and spent time with him in person about 5 times.
But you were there for a little while.
Yes. So what happened is the first time I went, I was there for a couple of weeks. And then the times after, I was with him the whole time, and I went by myself. I spent 2-3 weeks at a time.
And so you left your wife behind, like this is old school Chassidus style. You left your wife behind for weeks at a time to be by the Rebbe.
I guess so.
You think people are missing out on that these days? Like this?
One can get told off for giving honest answers, my friends. I think there is, I think yes, on a certain respect, yes, but maybe it's not the place and time today to do this. So even though there's a tzad to say, yes, I think it's healthy to do, I would still do it today with the permission of my wife. And I have done it. I've done it if there's different tzaddikim. So Rabbi Singer was one of my mentors. He was one of my mentors. And I had, obviously, as several other mentors. And there's times where I would go and I would leave and I wouldn't come back till the next day. As long as it's okay with my wife. She's the boss. You know, they say the Gemara says the man's meant to be the boss. Dain Lopian, one of my other Rabbanim in London, I didn't mention him, and I should have mentioned him. Dain Lopian was in London just before I got married. He was my halacha Rebbe. That Mamish, he was a Talmud of Reb Moshe, Reb Shlomo Zalman. He was Adam Gadol, Dain Lopian, Gershon Lopian. So I remember he said on the Gemara, the Gemara says the man has to wear the trousers. That's Chazal's sense of humor. So as long as it's okay with my wife. As long as my wife is okay, alles geht.
Right. Well, we do have a little bit of a sense of sometimes going away on a trip, like hey, me and Yehuda go to Uman, yeah. But it's not the same as going to a live Rebbe, but I think when we go to Uman, we definitely meet up with a lot of older Chassidim, and we connect to people who have Mesorahs over there. So it is, in a sense, going away and reconnecting to tzaddikim.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of nasias that we do. I mean, I've gone with you, Rebbe. I have to also bring up, a a lot of people might go and even take the advice that you're suggesting and go and meet with older people, but you have a very unique way of doing it and being able to elicit. You say that when you hear these different tzaddikim, you hear the childness in them. I personally have been witness to seeing how you elicit that childlike, awesome energy from people. If I could just, if you remember, we went together. I'll tell you, this was actually the first time that I really connected to you. I had come to Eretz Yisrael a little while before. I was working with Yaakov in a little apartment near the Rebbe's shul, and Yaakov told me, he's like, oh, Rabbi Gerzi, he's, Gewalt, and we had coffee together a few times. I was beginning, you were an interesting new, like, I didn't get you at all. I still don't. But then we were going, my brother came to check out, Eretz Yisrael to see, how it could come. It was, one of those
pilot trip.
A pilot trip, spying trip. And he said, okay, we're going to go to Bnei Brak to go visit some tzaddikim. And we said, would you be interested in coming? And you just hopped in the car. And that was it. We were on this amazing, that was the first Nasiya that I did with you. And we went to, first we had a list of tzaddikim. And as soon as some of those tzaddikim, gedolim, didn't work out, sometimes it didn't always work out, you're like, well, I couldn't bring you to here and to there. And we ended up going in and we met with the old Bahusha Rebbetzin, but just seeing the way that you interacted with them and the way that you were able to be so authentic and so open and so curious, but in a way that opened them up and it loosened the bonds. And I was there, I was like, this is incredible. Like, how do you just open these people up to hear the stories and to connect to them? So I want to ask you, maybe you can share with us, how do you do that? How can we open that up to be able to talk to people and come up with such a curious and such an openness that helps them to open up and be willing to share and teach? And
so first of all, I'll just say to you, don't get me. Baruch Shem, I'm Zoichet to Makayim, Lekutei Maran, Tinyana, Nun Beis. Chesed Hashem. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a very big praise. You know the term I'm speaking about? No. Tinyana, where Rabbi Nachman says, if we get God, if we get the Bara Olam, he's not worth serving. There's a mystery. And as well, Rabbi Nachman writes about the tzaddikim and I think this is a very big issue. I think this is very real. Tinyana Nun Beis is a very important Torah. The Rabbi Nachman tells us that we want everything to fit. We want everything to fit. We want the tzaddik to look a certain way. We want our Rabbanim to look a certain way. We want people to look a certain way. And I think, just Yehoshua Gerzi thinking about this Torah for many years, it doesn't work like that. People are people. Everyone is mysterious. The truth is we don't get anyone. We think we get people. You two, you're like unbelievable, deep, amplified, expansive worlds. There's so much to you. There's so much going on within you. You're both mysterious. You're both mystical. You have this in you. And I think what Rabbi Nachman is sharing with us is let go. Don't control. Let go. We can't control. Just be with the relationship in the present moment. Exit your mind. Enter the present moment. So Tinyana Nun Beis. Baruch Hashem. I don't know. I just try to turn up. I'm authentically interested. I really am interested. And when I sit before somebody, it's a whole world. It's a whole world. When I sit before anybody and I daven to the Beira Olam, I say, Hashem is Baruch, no, give me the koyach to take each person that I meet and just let me see their magic. Let me connect to their mystery. There's no such thing as a human being that's not magical, that's not majestic, that doesn't have that mystery. And we fall into our expectations and our assumptions. We fall into things should be like this and things should be like that. And we miss the boat. So I daven to the Rabbeinu Shalom that I could be curious. I can ask. I learned from my teachers, do a lot more listening than speaking. Happens to be I have a big mouth, so I speak a lot as well, but do a lot more listening than speaking. And I try my best to makayim that. Listen to the person in front of you. They have mamash wisdom to share with you. And then I could take that wisdom and hopefully become inspired and live better, become a better husband, become a better parent, become a better Evet Hashem. Be'ezras Hashem. I don't know if that answers your question adequately, but that's what I have to share with you right now.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. It's something I've definitely picked up from you is that I've seen you interact with people, and you ask leading questions, and then you really listen. And that's one of the reasons that I love spending time with you, is because you really do listen. And when you're around someone who really listens, and you feel that sincerity, that this person's really interested, it opens you up, and you actually want to say things, and you actually want to talk about things, and it's awesome. And I think and I've seen it, and I've tried it out. I've experimented with it. It's a lot of fun to experiment with. Like even in taxis, if you run into older taxi driver, and I've asked people, where you from? Where are your parents from? What was like? Just recently, a few weeks ago, I had an older Moroccan taxi driver, and I got great stories out of him about life in the old country and what it was like to be a Jew in Morocco. It was awesome. It was like with your template, just ask a question, be genuinely interested, and people just might open up to you.
So I saw this first as an avodah, and I want to tell you that I fail miserably sometimes as well. Sometimes I get caught up in my own ego. Obviously, I'm no one's perfect, and I'm definitely not perfect. I remember seeing Rabbi Singer, one event that really changed me. I remember there was a lady, I think she was a nurse, and she was having a lot of issues, and she came in and she spoke for a very, very long time to Rabbi Singer. And Rabbi Singer didn't say much. In fact, he remained quiet most of the time, but he was listening, he was engaged, he was so present. And when she walked out, she says, "Oh, okay, amazing, I have all the answers, everything is done, everything is done." And I was like, you spoke the whole time. You just talked and talked and talked. And anytime Rabbi Singer wanted even to say something, you didn't let him speak, you spoke. And you're telling me that you got all the answers? And I ran into Rabbi Singer and I said, Mustisti, what are you doing? What are you doing? How? What? And I remember he said to me, he said that when you really listen, shmiya, and he said, this is how the Baal Shem Tov was matakim people. You and I, we have all the answers inside of us. You and I, we have all the wisdom inside of us. You and I have muchness. But the question is, did we allow ourselves to hear it? And Rabbi Singer said that the Baal Shem Tov would allow people to hear themselves. And he showed me, taught me, he was already speaking to me about a mahalach, an approach to meeting the world, meeting yourself. Within such, he shared with me something called Baal Shem Tov listening. And he would share, before he would sit with somebody, he would say, Hashem Yisbarach, give me the ability to really listen to them. Let me listen.
Hey, so we just experienced little technical difficulties. Rebbe, you were sharing about Baal Shem Tov listening. If you can just continue that thought, please.
So what we were sharing was that Rabbi Singer, he had practices to upgrade his way of being, which really is a way of navigating human experience. He understood how the human experience manifests in an incredibly real way. He understood the architecture of the soul, as we call it. And he had this Mesorah passed down to him from his teachers, and it was called Baal Shem Tov listening. It was a way to get into a certain state in order to really open up and listen to the person in front of you. And he was a master. He was a master listener.
Wow. Would you be up for sharing just a drop a little bit about how we can do that?
the Baal Shem Tov listening? I know that we've spent many hours talking about Baal Shem Tov listening together, but maybe just a little bit
Of course.
for all those listening.
Of course, how if I could be of service? So, number one, what we could notice as we usually listen, there's noise going on inside. And this is the same as we daven, as we are learning. There's noise, there's internal stimulus going on inside. Do I agree with what this person is saying? Do I not agree? Do I understand what the person is saying? And what we do, just to start off, is just to stop. Take a breath and just stop. Take a breath and just slow down. And through taking a breath and slowing down, when we come to listen to the person, if an internal voice comes up, let it go. I'm now listening to you. You exist, and I'm listening to you. That's all that exists right now. And what we can, and this as well is based on certain teachings from the school of Rabbi Singh and his friends, is if a voice comes up, just acknowledge it. If something comes up, acknowledge it and let it go. So, for example, if I'm speaking to somebody, there are times where I may actually stop and say to the person, I wasn't on you. Let me just refocus. And as well, if something comes up from the inside, and I can't do that with the person I'm speaking to, I will just say, hi. If a voice comes up, if a feeling comes up, hi, I recognize that you're there, and then I will refocus on the person.
Wow, incredible. Thank you.
So it's so interesting. I was recently having a WhatsApp conversation with our brother Bensi, and we were going back and forth and recording voice notes. And at some point I said to him, why don't we just talk on the phone? And he says, no, this is much better, because this way we actually listen to everything the other person says, we process it, and then you send the thought back, and it's so much deeper. When we're on the phone with each other, we right away want to answer. You're always constantly, formulating a response. So.
Baruch Hashem. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but I think for now that could be maybe helpful for people. Baruch Hashem.
Okay, so I think it's really getting late. Baruch Hashem, I've really enjoyed this time. But since it is, before we wrap up, since it is the Ropshitzer's Yartzeit, we were hoping you could share, maybe, it's really up to you, but maybe a Torah from the Ropshitzer, or an idea or an insight or something to connect to the Holy Ropshitzer, the Holy Zaidy.
So I would suggest my two Rabbanim, apart from my many Rabbanim, my two Rabbanim, I've got on one side Rabbi Nachman, on the other side the Ropshitzer. And it's very interesting because when I read through the teachings of Rabbi Nachman, I happen to love other tzaddikim as well, and I learn other tzaddikim sforim. That's maybe part of the Ropshitzer as well. Just maybe a bit of background. A bit of background for those who don't know. The Ropshitzer was born 1760, and he was nifta 1827. He was zeicha for that time period to live quite a long life. As well, what's important to know about the Ropshitzer, he died, when he was born on the day the Baal Shem Tov died. And the Divrei Chaim, Reb Chaim of Sons, Reb Chaim's Halberstam, who was a Talmud of the Ropshitzer, he famously said, when a sun sets, a sun rises. So there's a number of tzaddikim who used to call him the kleine Baal Shem Tov, the little Baal Shem Tov, that he was, so to speak, coming and drawing from the Baal Shem Tov and giving something to us. What's interesting as well about the Ropshitzer is that the Ropshitzer came from a very, very yichustika family. Yet, he, even though he was proud of it, he worked incredibly hard on himself. And he had a number of Rebbes. He didn't just have one Rebbe, as was normal in that time period. You have a Talmud Rebbe, Rebbe Talmud. Here in this situation with the Ropshitzer, he went to a number of different Rebbes. He was a Talmud of the Noam Elimelech, Rav Elimelech of Lezhensk. He was a Talmud of the Chayz of Lublin, the Koznitzer Magid, and as well Menachem Mendel of Rimanov. And this is something very, very important because basically when speaking about the Ropshitzer, he was an incredibly unique character. And I believe there's many overlaps coming from slightly different angles between Rabbi Nachman and the Ropshitzer that sometimes is lost. The Ropshitzer was a person who was focused and deep. And even though he was a Rav, and I've based in a Boki in Nigla, he emphasized Nista, Chassidus and Nista. So even though the Ropshitzer was deeply entrenched in Nigla, he was a Pesach, he was an Avbeistin, his focal point was Chassidus and Nista. And there's stories, he writes that in his previous Gilgul, he was Makayim the Nigla and not Makayim the Nista. And one life experience for the Ropshitzer was to be deep and to be focused, to be deep and focused. You know, we can notice in our world, we live in a superficial and, we're not focused. We're living in a very superficial world. It's a problem today. And what we're suggesting here is the message of the Ropshitzer was to be deep and was to be focused. I find as well, I'm sure everybody knows that the Ropshitzer, he, as we said, was a Rebbe who probably out of all the different tzaddikim had the most Rebbes. And that's because he felt that you can't learn everything from one person. You have to experience the whole in the part and the part in the whole. So it didn't mean that the Ropshitzer was all over the place. It meant that he was focused and he was picking up and learning what he needed to learn from the different tzaddikim he hung around. And there's one Einikel said to me, he went to see the Pnei Shechina, he went to see the Shechina on all the different tzaddikim's faces. As well, it was very difficult to have the Ropshitzer as a Talmud. He was a very interesting character. I mentioned that I find when I'm learning Rabbi Nachman, I hear a lot of the Ropshitzer as well. So for example, if we speak about Tinyana Mayach Mem Ches, where we have the famous Kol Ha'olam Kuloi Gesher Tzar Ba'od, but people miss out the words there, La'avor, you have to go on that Gesher. The world is a very narrow bridge. What does that mean? There's a fine line between living a conscious, awakened life or being in a sleep state alive. And the Ropshitzer was a Baal Das. The Ropshitzer has a number of Torahs about being in Das, Yud Gimel Midos Rachamim, Nun Sharei Bina, and Zohar Kodesh. And he's telling us, he's sharing with us, be alive, be alive. And just as Rabbi Nachman, he chose to go on this very narrow bridge, which is not easy. It's not always easy. To be real, to be authentic is a journey. The Ropshitzer as well was on this journey. And as well, we know, for example, Chaim Aran in, I think it's Reish Ayin Tet, where Rabbi Nachman speaks about how he was a Chiddush. There was an element of Chiddush as well with the Ropshitzer. Ropshitzer as well was a Chiddush. And famously, we mentioned it before, Tinyana Nun Beis, where famously Rabbi Nachman, he writes there, I mean, I have a L'Kutei Maran. If you have one, open it up. I think it's Nun Beis, where Rabbi Nachman speaks about how we don't really understand the Beira Olam and we don't understand the Tzaddik. Not everything has to fit in our box. Ropshitzer was very much like that. How did that manifest for him? That manifested is that in a way where, number one, he was joking a lot of the time and doing pranks. There was a lot of laughter. And again, that laughter wasn't stam. That laughter was to do with the irony that he chapped because he was so conscious. And as well, he would make fun of the Rebbes. If he saw a Rebbe and he was fat, he would call him fat. If he was thin, he would call him thin. If he was tall, he would call him, you're tall. You must not know us down here because your heads are in the clouds. Or, he used to make fun. Why? To keep people on edge, but as well to keep himself on edge. he didn't want for himself, and he didn't want for his community to be in a sleep state. And we famously know, though, when he was speaking to his Hasidim, he was kind, he was gentle, he was understanding. So when he felt there was gaiva, he would rock the boats. When there was anava and shiflus, he was the most gentle and kind person. And his children, all his children became Rebbes. And his children, when speaking about their father, there's a few texts here and there, but they speak with such love, such kavod, about a father who really cared for them and invested in them. And the Ropshitzer was community. He was about community. He was about the health of others. And for me, you've got the darkness, so to speak, the darkness of Rabbi Nachman. There's a darkness of Rabbi Nachman that do we have to say more? With the Ropshitzer, there's this bridge of recognizing this irony. There's this bridge. I believe both Rabbi Nachman, the master Rabbi Nachman, and the master of the Ropshitzer, they recognized the irony and paradox of reality, and they played it. They leveraged every single situation to up their game. They leveraged every single situation to know, as it says in Torah Aleph, B'chol davar, B'chol davar. There's a seichel, there's a chokhmah, B'chol davar. Every single thing in our reality, nothing left out. Chassid Shem.
These technical difficulties are definitely driving me bananas.
It's the Ropshitzer playing. The Ropshitzer's playing games with us. You should feel good. You should feel wanted and needed. The Ropshitzer's looking down at us, and he's pressing all the buttons to drive us a little cuckoo. Chassid Shem. So what I was sharing, what I was suggesting, is that the Ropshitzer had this deep relationship with reality, that he knew when to joke and laugh, which there was a lot of that. Yet he knew to be sensitive. He knew the subtleties. He knew tact. He knew how to work with people. And he had this marvelous and deep relationship with his whole kahila. And there's a number of stories, not to go into them now, but there's a number of stories which demonstrate this. It demonstrates his humor, his laughter, because he was so sensitive to irony. Irony was like a big thing, the paradox. Everything is a paradox. The Emek HaMelech writes that Hashem Yisbarach looked at all of creation, and when he got to the end of creation, he chuckled. And profound as it is, abstract as it is, from that chuckle, everything that we know came into existence. And the Ropshitzer was very much like that. He laughed life into existence. He had this unbelievable koyach. And I believe the message of the Ropshitzer is a message that's so important today, because we take things too seriously. We're control freaks. Everything, right. as we said, Tinyana Mem Base, or everything has to fit, and that's not how life works. Nun base. It's like, I just refer back to that Torah so many times. We don't understand everything. We're not going to understand everything. And all we can do is chap shat that it doesn't make sense and laugh about it. And to joke.
It's interesting. I think that we might have had this conversation more than once, but this is very reminiscent of the Torahs and the ideas and the way that I kind of relate to Yitzchak Avinu, Midas HaGvura, which is so focused and so on the ball, but yet it's mamish like tzchaik, it's laughter. And the truth is that I think, like Rebbe mentioned, creativity is really only in the dark edges. When we go out of the reservation, we have to go explore. How far to the edge can you go? And that's where laughter is, and that's where real growth is, and that's where authenticity is. When you stay like the same thoughts that you had yesterday, there's no real originality, no creativity. And that definitely seems like a lot of Ropshitz.
Very Ropshitz and Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman speaks about Chidush. Rabbi Nachman in Chaim Maran, Reish Ayin Teti, speaks about Chidush. And he says, even if I was not the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and there would be no Chidush. And he uses the term there I think look it up for yourself, but he uses the term there that the world was quiet. The world was quiet. The Ropshitzer love Chidush and Rabbi Nachman love Chidush. And by the Ropshitzer, it's an amazing thing. We're speaking about the Chesed and Gevura. Chesed is Ahava. Chesed is loving kindness. I would suggest in our generation, it's not loving kindness we need. Everyone speaks about Ahavas Chinam, Ahavas Chinam. There's enough love in the world. And as the Beatles said, all you need is love. This is not true. It's not true. What we need is Kavod. Kavod is actualized love. Kavod is respecting boundaries. Kavod is recognizing what does the person in front of me like and what do they not like. Am I going to respect that or not? Kavod is kaved. And that's all a bechina of Gevura, which is a bechina of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is schok. Yitzchak, as we know, is the Av that ushers in the Moshiach. And we can go on and on with these Torahs, but I would suggest that both these personalities, who we both love, the Ropshitzer, Rabbi Nachman, they're coming from a place of Gevura. They're coming from a place of Kavod more than a place of Chesed. And just as if we go back, for example, Rabbi Nachman speaks about in Azamra that you have to look at the good. What koyach are you using to look at the good? You're using one koyach and one koyach only, Gevura. That Chesed is going to be the expansion of how things are manifesting. Chesed, the guys are Russia. No, what's Gevura? I have to hyper-focus to come to a place of das and choose using my Bechira and come into a place of Gevura, a place of Kavod Habrius, a place of Kavod Hashem, Kavod HaTorah, and recognize if Hashem brought something into existence, B'chol Davar, every element of existence has an Akudah Tova. And the Ropshitzer was very much like that. The Ropshitzer, he would say very often, wherever you are in Avodah, wherever you are, give it to the Beira Olam. Give it to the Beira. So if you're exhausted as you daven, Hashem, this is the korban that I have for you. If I feel annoyed, Hashem, this is the korban that I have for you. And there's many overlaps. That's Gevura. That's an Indian of Kavod. We have enough love. We have enough Ava. And I think that's a big chiddush by the Ropshitzer and by Rabbi Nachman. Even though Rabbi Nachman is a central spheres and the Ropshitzer says central spheres, he's very much about being a Baldas, Yud Gimel Binos Rachamim, Nun Sharei Bina, which you see in his forum. The Nakuda is that there's something so deep going on with both of them. There's such, if I could say, deep lovers of life. Hakol, they recognize the davar, mamash, the seichel and the chochmah and b'chol davar in an unbelievably wide, deep and amplified way. And there's always more to talk about. I think the takeaway just of what I'm trying to share with me on this day and with us is that be sensitive into not falling into our ego-driven traps, to make sure that we remain in a state where we don't know. We really don't. We should have the deepest kavod for the whole of the Bria and laugh, be happy. If it's Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, mitzvah gedola liyos b'simcha, and laugh. Laughter comes from thinking, creativity. Laugh, tzchok. There's so much that we could laugh about where we take seriously and we break that ice. We're mevatel the gezeros. So please add, Rabbi Yehuda. I want to hear from you.
This was absolutely incredible, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that even all these, tikkunim that we had at the end, this is mamash gewalt. I dropped out, Yaakov dropped out, but Baruch Hashem, the fact is that being able to have these moments together and being able to have these conversations are huge. I really, really appreciate you being here with us. And it's, we do have a wealth of tzadikim, and I very much resonated with that aspect that, of the Ropshitzer being open to so many different Rebbes, and he synthesized that, and he was able to make that. And I feel like that's really our generation, and I feel myself, it's a schus to be able to know you and to know many tzadikim, but that are and we're able to synthesize it to make.
I think that's another message for us as well. Sorry, just going in a little bit more, just because I can't hold myself back. I told you I've got a big mouth. the nakuda, I think, which is really relevant for us today as well, apart from the Kavod Abrius, recognizing that people are different. People are always going to be different. They're always going to be different. I told over a Maisa to Reb Yaakov that the nakuda is that the Ropshitzer, on a certain respect, and it may sound a little bit odd, was less bothered about somebody being frum or not frum, and was more bothered about the human being behind all of that. And there's a number of stories to talk about with that nakuda. So he respected people where they are in their experience, and he worked from that place. He didn't bring his agenda on what was going on. If somebody was a Balgaiva, he would go for it. He would mamish go for it. And as well, he was immersive. He was a synthesizer. I remember I spoke to an anicle of the Ropshitzer who was nifta. I met him when he was in his, he was over 100 years old when I met him. And he was nifta 17 years ago. And I asked him, I said, did the Ropshitzer have favored Sforim? And he basically said to me, he did say certain things that the Ropshitzer enjoyed learning and that he felt was important to learn, Reish's Chochmah and a few other Sforim. But the nakuda is, he said by the Ropshitzer, he wanted the individual to be the individual and find their own path. So if you're machazik by Tanya, learn Tanya. If you're machazik by Breslev, learn Breslev. If you're machazik by Piasetzna, learn Piasetzna. If it's Ishbitz, learn Ishbitz. Because the Ropshitzer believed deeply, I can't live your life. You have to live your life. You've got your genius. You've got your wisdom. You've got your gifts that the world needs to know and the world is waiting to meet. And I believe that message is so relevant for us today.
Amen. Amen. Yes, that is incredibly relevant. Thank you so much, Rebbe. Really, really appreciate that, and we're definitely looking forward to having you back many times on this podcast. I know there's so many more conversations that we want to have, but this was really a wonderful, wonderful start. Thank you.
Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yaakov, I love you both very much. You're such beautiful, mamish, such beautiful beings. And I just wish you goodness to you and your beautiful families. And mamish, all of Am Yisrael, we should all go from strength to strength. And all of the human race, we should go from strength to strength, bringing much light and love and kavod to the world. Be'ezras Hashem, living tiferes, living beauty. Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach.
Amen. Amen. Be blessed.